My daughter called me at 2 in the morning. Her voice was slurred, trembling with a terror that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad, please come get me," she whispered. When I arrived at her in-law's wealthy estate, her mother-in-law physically blocked the front door. She looked me dead in the eye and said she is not leaving. I am a retired construction contractor who spent a lifetime breaking through concrete and steel. No wooden door and no arrogant woman was going to keep me from my little girl. I forced my way in, and what I saw on that bedroom floor made my blood boil. Before I continue my story, please let me know what city or country you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe a father will do whatever it takes to protect his child. My name is Victor Caldwell. I am 70 years old. For over 4 decades, I worked as a commercial construction contractor right here in Illinois. I spent my life dealing with blueprints, load-bearing walls, and cold, hard steel. I am a man of logic and structure. You have to be when a single miscalculation can bring a 50-story building crashing down. I retired a few years ago, hoping to live a quiet life after losing my beloved wife, Sarah, a decade ago to a brutal illness. Sarah was the heart of our family. When she passed, she left behind a secret trust fund for our only daughter, Rachel. Rachel is 32 years old now, a dedicated pediatric nurse with a heart of gold. She married a man named Derek Thorne. Derek is a 35-year-old investment banker downtown. On paper, he is polished, successful, and charming. His mother, Evelyn Thorne, comes from old money up in the North Shore of Chicago. They live in a sprawling, isolated mansion that always felt more like a museum than a home to me. I never quite fit into their world of country clubs and cocktail parties, but I tolerated the condescension because Rachel seemed happy. I always taught my daughter to see the good in people, but sometimes people do not have any good in them at all. It all started on a freezing Tuesday night. I was asleep in my empty house when the sudden sharp ringing of my cell phone woke me up. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was exactly 2 in the morning. When you reach my age, a phone call at that hour never brings good news. I answered immediately. "Dad," a voice whispered. It was Rachel, but she did not sound like my daughter. Her words were heavily slurred, dragging together, as if she were fighting just to keep her eyes open. "Rachel. Sweetheart." "What is wrong?" I asked, sitting up straight, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. "Dad, please come get me," she gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her tone was laced with absolute raw terror. "They will not let me." Before she could finish her sentence, there was a muffled thud, a sharp gasp, and the line went completely dead. I shouted her name into the receiver, but there was only silence. I did not waste a single second trying to call her back. My contractor instincts kicked in immediately. When an alarm sounds on a job site, you do not ask questions, you act. I threw off the blankets, grabbed my heavy winter coat, and ran out to my truck. I unlocked my safe and took out my legally registered firearm. I am not a violent man, but I am a fiercely protective father. I placed the weapon securely inside my truck glove box, just in case. I did not know what I was walking into, but I knew my daughter was in grave danger. The drive to the North Shore usually takes 40 minutes. I made it in 25. The roads were deserted, covered in a thin layer of frost, but my mind was racing faster than my tires. Rachel is a nurse. She does not drink heavily. She does not take drugs. She is the most responsible, level-headed person I know. That slurred voice, that sheer panic, it simply did not make any logical sense. At 2:45 in the morning, my headlights swept across the imposing iron gates of the Thorne estate. The gates were surprisingly left wide open. I drove my truck right up the long, winding driveway and slammed it into park in front of their massive double doors. The house was entirely dark, except for one dim light on the second floor. Rachel and Derek's bedroom. I pounded my heavy fists against the solid oak front door. I did not ring the doorbell. I hammered on the wood with the force of a man who was ready to tear the house down brick by brick. A few moments later, the door swung open. Standing there was Evelyn Thorne, Derek's mother. Any normal person woken up at 3 in the morning by frantic knocking would be in pajamas looking disheveled and confused. Not Evelyn. She was fully dressed in a tailored blouse and expensive slacks. Her hair was perfectly styled and she wore a full face of makeup. She had not been sleeping. She had been awake waiting. "Victor, what on earth is the meaning of this disturbance?" she demanded, her voice dripping with cold, calculated arrogance. "Where is my daughter?" I demanded, stepping forward to enter the house. Evelyn crossed her arms and physically blocked the doorway, standing her ground with a defiant smirk. "Rachel is having a severe mental episode," she said smoothly, not a single trace of concern in her eyes. "She is completely hysterical. Derek gave her something to help her calm down, and she is finally resting. She cannot be disturbed right now. I suggest you go home, Victor. You are making a fool of yourself." I stared at this wealthy, entitled woman trying to dismiss me like I was the hired help. The stench of her lie was suffocating. I did not ask for her permission. I stepped forward using my broad shoulders to shove her aside. She stumbled back against the foyer wall, gasping in feigned outrage. "You cannot barge into my home!" she shrieked. "Watch me!" I growled. I took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, ignoring her shrill protests echoing behind me. I reached the second-floor hallway and headed straight for the master suite. The door was locked tight. I did not hesitate. 30 years of swinging sledgehammers and kicking down drywall had not entirely left my aging bones. I raised my heavy work boot and kicked the door right below the handle. The expensive wood splintered, the lock gave way, and the door flew open with a loud, violent crash. I rushed into the room and my breath caught painfully in my throat. The room was a complete disaster. Designer lamps were overturned, and the silk bedsheets were torn and dragged onto the floor. And there, lying unconscious on the cold bathroom tile, was my little girl, Rachel. I dropped to my knees beside her. Her clothes were disheveled, and she was completely unresponsive. Her breathing was terribly shallow, barely a whisper of air escaping her lips. But what made my blood run freezing cold were her arms. Under the harsh, bright bathroom light, I saw dark, violent finger-shaped bruises wrapping completely around her pale skin. Someone had pinned her down with terrifying force. As a man who understands mechanics and leverage, I knew immediately that these were not marks from a simple fall. These were the undeniable marks of a brutal struggle. Before I could even reach out to check her pulse, I heard heavy, panicked footsteps rushing down the hallway. Derek lunged into the bedroom, panting heavily, his eyes darting frantically from the broken door to my face. He stood there in the doorway, wearing silk pajama bottoms and a cashmere sweater that was completely unwrinkled. For a man who was supposedly jolted awake by a home invasion, his hair was perfectly styled, and he was not out of breath from panic. He was panting from exertion. My eyes locked onto his, and in that split second, I saw a flash of raw, unfiltered guilt before he hurriedly plastered on a mask of shock. "Call an ambulance right now!" I roared, my voice shaking the expensive framed artwork on the walls. Derek took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Victor, please calm down. We do not need to involve emergency services. I am already handling this. I have my mother calling Dr. Harrison, our private family physician. He is discreet, and he knows how to handle these delicate family situations without making a public spectacle." I stared at him, unable to comprehend the sheer audacity of his words. My daughter was lying unconscious on the cold marble floor, her breathing dangerously shallow, her skin turning an unnatural shade of pale, and this polished coward was worried about a public spectacle. "She is not breathing right," I snarled, stepping over the ruined wood of the doorframe and closing the distance between us. "Call 911 or I swear to God, Derek, I will break your jaw." He held his ground, though his jaw tightened. "You are not thinking clearly, Victor. You do not understand what is happening here. Rachel is having a severe episode. If the authorities come, they will put her on an involuntary psychiatric hold. It will ruin her career. It will ruin our reputation. Dr. Harrison is on his way. Just step back and let us take care of my wife." He made the fatal mistake of reaching out to grab my shoulder. I did not argue anymore. 40 years of hauling steel beams and breaking concrete had given me a physical density that this soft manicured investment banker could not possibly match. I grabbed the front of his expensive cashmere sweater, twisted the fabric into my fist, and shoved him violently backward. Derek stumbled over the debris of the broken door and crashed hard against the hallway wall, gasping for air as the breath was knocked out of his lungs. "Do not ever touch me," I warned him in a low, deadly whisper. "And do not ever tell me how to take care of my own blood." I turned my back on him and knelt beside Rachel. Up close, the dark bruises on her arms looked even more horrifying. The distinct shape of fingers pressed deeply into her skin told a story of violence, of someone holding her down against her will. I carefully slid my arms beneath her knees and behind her back, lifting her from the floor. She was heartbreakingly light, completely limp in my embrace. As I held her against my chest, a sudden wave of memories washed over me. I remembered carrying her exactly like this, when she was a little girl fast asleep after a long day at the park, safe and protected in her father's arms. The contrast between that beautiful memory and this nightmare fueled a burning fire in my gut. I carried her out into the hallway. Evelyn was waiting at the top of the grand staircase, her face pale with fury. "You are making a terrible mistake, Victor," she hissed, her manicured fingers gripping the banister. "You are tearing this family apart over a simple misunderstanding." I did not waste a single breath responding to her. I carried Rachel down the stairs, out through the heavy front doors, and straight to my truck. I carefully laid her across the back seat, securing her with a seatbelt and wrapping my heavy winter coat around her shivering body. Just as I was about to climb into the driver's seat, Derek scrambled out of the house and threw himself into the passenger seat. "If you are taking her, I am coming with you," he demanded, his chest heaving. "I am her husband. I have the legal right to be there." I did not have the time to drag him out of the vehicle. Every second mattered. I slammed the door, started the engine, and tore down the winding driveway, leaving the iron gates of the Thorne estate far behind. The drive to City General Hospital was a tense, suffocating blur. I drove recklessly, breaking every speed limit, while Derek sat beside me in the dark, feverishly typing messages on his phone. When we finally screeched to a halt in front of the emergency room doors, I carried Rachel inside, shouting for help. A team of nurses rushed forward with a gurney, instantly taking over. But before I could even explain the situation, a tall man in a pristine white coat emerged from a side office. He walked with a familiar, arrogant stride. I noticed his name badge immediately. Dr. Harrison. He bypassed me entirely and walked straight to Derek. "Derek, your mother called me," the doctor said, his voice hushed and far too calm for a medical emergency. "I have a private trauma room ready. We will handle this quietly." I stepped forward, my hands clenched into tight fists. "I want a full blood panel done immediately," I stated, looking the doctor squarely in the eye. "I want to know exactly what is in her system, and I want an examination of the contusions on her arms." Dr. Harrison looked at me as if I were a piece of dirt he had just scraped off his shoe. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you we provide the highest standard of care here. However, Derek is her legal next of kin. I will be discussing her treatment plan exclusively with him." He gestured to two large security guards who suddenly appeared behind him. "Please wait in the family area. You are not permitted in the trauma room." The guards stepped forward, forming a solid wall between my daughter and me. I knew that fighting them would only get me arrested, leaving Rachel entirely isolated with these people. I swallowed the bitter taste of bile in my throat and forced myself to step back, retreating to the sterile, brightly lit waiting area. Through a narrow glass panel down the hall, I could see the monitors flashing inside Rachel's room. I sat down on a hard plastic chair, leaning my elbows on my knees, and let my mind do what it had been trained to do for 4 decades. I analyzed the structure. When you spend your entire life building commercial high-rises, you develop a sixth sense for recognizing when a foundation is flawed. You learn to spot the tiny hairline fractures in a concrete slab that indicate an unstable base. You learn that when a steel beam buckles, it leaves a specific pattern of stress marks. Physical evidence never lies. People lie, but the structural damage always tells the exact truth of what happened. I closed my eyes and mentally reconstructed the bruises on Rachel's arms. The angle of the thumbprints, the deep purple contusions pressing into the soft tissue of her inner biceps. If she had fallen down the stairs, as Evelyn's blocked door and Derek's panic seemed to imply the impact, trauma would be random. There would be scrapes on her elbows, defensive bruising on her forearms from trying to catch her fall. But Rachel did not have random impact trauma. She had targeted pressure points. Someone had held her down by her arms with terrifying sustained force. The structural narrative they were trying to sell me was a complete fabrication. The foundation of their story was rotting from the inside out. An hour crawled by in agonizing silence. Finally, the heavy doors of the trauma unit pushed open, and Dr. Harrison walked toward the waiting area holding a silver metal clipboard. Derek stood up, instantly rubbing his eyes to produce a fresh layer of artificial tears. Dr. Harrison stopped in front of us, his expression molded into a mask of professional sympathy. Victor. He began using my first name with unwarranted familiarity. We have stabilized Rachel's vitals, but the situation is incredibly grave. He handed the clipboard not to me, but directly to Derek. I leaned over to read the bright red print on the top page. It was a rapid toxicology report. Rachel's blood contains a highly lethal combination of severe anxiety medications and a massive amount of alcohol, the doctor explained smoothly, locking his gaze onto Derek. Her system is completely overwhelmed. It is a miracle her heart did not simply stop. As soon as the words left the doctor's mouth, Derek collapsed into the nearest plastic chair. He buried his face deep in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently as he let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed off the linoleum walls. "I am so sorry," Derek wept, his voice cracking with rehearsed devastation. I knew she was stressed at the clinic, but I had no idea it was this bad. I tried to grab the pills from her. I tried to hold her down, but she fought me. I failed. I failed to stop her suicide attempt. I stood there in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the hospital, the crisp white toxicology report still gripped tightly in my weathered hands. Derek's theatrical sobbing echoed against the pale linoleum floors. He buried his face deep in his expensive cashmere sleeves, acting the part of the devastated husband with sickening precision. I did not move to comfort him. I simply waited. After a few carefully timed moments, Derek wiped his face, taking a deep, shuddering breath, before looking up at me. His eyes were completely dry. "Victor." "I did not want to tell you this," Derek began, his voice dropping to a somber, conspiratorial whisper. "I wanted to protect her dignity. But Rachel has been spiraling out of control for months. The immense pressure at the pediatric clinic, losing those desperately sick children, it completely broke her. She started having severe panic attacks back in October. At first it was just trouble sleeping through the night. Then the situation escalated rapidly. She began drinking heavily in secret to numb the pain. She hid bottles of wine in the back of her closet, burying them underneath her winter sweaters where she thought I would never find them. I stared at him, my face a mask of impenetrable stone. I did not interrupt his performance. I let him build the framework of his elaborate lie. When you construct a building with cheap, substandard materials, you want the dishonest contractor to keep stacking the bricks until the entire structure collapses under its own fraudulent weight. I knew how to listen to the groans of failing steel. Derek gestured frantically toward the closed trauma room doors. Tonight, things reached an absolute boiling point. He continued, his tone pleading for my sympathy. She was completely incoherent, screaming wildly about how she could not take the pain anymore. She swallowed a massive handful of pills and washed them down with half a bottle of cheap Merlot. When I tried to intervene and stop her, she lost her mind. She ran straight toward the second-story window in our bedroom. She was actually trying to throw herself out onto the concrete. Victor. I had to tackle her to the floor to save her. I had to pin her down by her arms with all my body weight, just to keep her from killing herself. That is exactly where those bruises came from. I was only trying to save her life. Before I could dissect the gaping holes in his ridiculous fabricated story, the sharp, rhythmic clicking of high heels announced the arrival of Evelyn Thorne. She glided down the hospital corridor, looking just as immaculate as she had standing at her front door. She carried a sleek designer handbag and wore an expression of profound, heavily manufactured tragedy. She walked right up to me, placing a perfectly manicured hand gently on my forearm. "Oh, Victor." Evelyn sighed, her voice dripping with thick, artificial